When you think of Sun Devil football, you think of Sun Devil for life. If we get the Valley all in, the sky is the limit.
I went to Arizona State. I'm a Sun Devil, man.
I'm home.
Hello, Sun Devil fans. Brad Denny with 3TV, CBS 5, and the Speak of the Devils podcast here. Welcome back for another episode of the Speak of the Devils Sit-Down series, where I bring you in-depth, one-on-one conversations with key players, coaches, and other figures within Sun Devil athletics. The school year is drawing to a close, which means it's time for my annual sit-down with ASU Athletic Director Ray Anderson. This is the sixth year that Anderson and I have taken a deep dive examination of Sun Devil, Pac-12, and collegiate athletics, and this one might be the most interesting yet. As he enters his ninth year at the helm of ASU's athletic department, we discuss the new era of Sun Devil football, how the school is supporting the Activate the Valley movement, the highs and lows from other key sports, infrastructure projects, and a candid look at the reasons behind the collective lack of national success for the three highest profile sports of football, men's basketball, and baseball. We also take a deep dive into ASU's evolving approach to NIL and get the latest on the NCAA's investigation into the football program. But we also discuss the uncertain future of the Pac-12 Conference and the media rights negotiations, the seeming inevitability of superconferences and ASU's place within the landscape, tailgating and the fan game day experience, and so much more. There's a lot to get to, so let's get this thing rolling. Here's my conversation with ASU Athletic Director Ray Anderson. All right, Ray. So this is our sixth year doing these kind of spring one-on-ones. Really appreciate time. Always usually the most popular episode that we do in a given year. A lot of interest. And the thing's got people talking, obviously, so much right now. Kind of the revitalization of Sun Devil football. Just about 6 months in. It feels a lot longer. Just like so much has happened. How would you kind of encapsulate these first 6 months of the Kenny Dillingham era?
Yeah, well, first of all, Brad, good to see you again. I'm glad we could redo this thing yet again. But there's no question that the presence of Kenny has brought an excitement and a level and a buzz, and very frankly, a sense of hope that has not been here in the last 4, 5, 6 years, actually, to be truthful about it. So it's nice to see that Activate the Valley was not just words. In fact, he's fulfilled a lot of that, and you can just tell by the reaction of the folks. I can't go into the grocery store. I can't go down Mill Avenue without some folks recognizing me and saying, hey, great hire on Kenny. Dillingham's got us all excited. So that is a testament to the fact that he's gotten off to a very, very strong start. And I think there's hope and there's urgency and there's just excitement in the air about the new era of Arizona State football coming here. And I think there's also some excitement that part of what we were trying to deliver on is a place where you could bring players in and develop them for the NFL. I think there's some sense that will also be here under Kenny and this staff, an opportunity to do that for those who aspire.
Now, as somebody, obviously made the hire, you're here every day, the day in, day out, and you're seeing things very, right up close. What have you seen are kind of just the more pronounced changes, in terms of, this time a year or two ago versus right now on the kind of day-to-day basis?
Well, certainly the level of enthusiasm and excitement, which what we were talking about. The things I like to hear about on a day-to-day basis is the fact that our ticket sales and renewals are off the chart, and so that's indicative of the excitement. And you can see, very frankly, the pep in people's step. This infusion of energy, and it's not just in football, but it's in a lot of our programs, but driven by football, very frankly, and to a lesser extent men's basketball, and certainly hockey as well. There's just an excitement that bubbles up, and you see it in how people comport themselves. They carry themselves. There seems to be a brighter sense of enjoyment around here than there have been over the course of the last 2 or 3 years. Some of that driven by just the negative impact of COVID, to be sure. But there's like a new energy, a new spirit, and it's fun to come to work and see that across the board.
Now, you mentioned that there's a hope and the optimism here that hadn't been perhaps around for for a little bit, and obviously one of the worst seasons of recent memory of Sun Devil football with a 3-9 record. Now, when you look back, what do you feel like kind of led up to such a difficult year and just an era perhaps of not having that hope, and some of the lessons and things that you've learned from those experiences, the struggles within that football program that you can put forward?
Well, there's no question that when change comes, you've got to be able to adapt and adapt effectively. So when you have the change of NIL starting 3 or 4 years ago, and then the transfer portal, and then all the challenges of being shut down during COVID, and all the isolation that individual players and players at large felt, that was a very difficult environment to navigate, to be sure. And we all struggled doing it, including our former head coach and the staff just didn't make the appropriate adjustments. So that you think back on and you regret that it happened prior to those things occurring. We've actually felt like we had some trajectory and things were trending positively. But then circumstances come, you don't handle it well. And then when it comes time, you have to make tough decisions, which we did. And now we're looking forward to the environment, the enthusiasm, the new energy that we have here now, Brad.
One of the things that you mentioned just now, and also when you introduced Kenny to the media, is just his sense of being able to be on that forefront, to know what the landscape of college sports, college football specifically, NIL, portal, all that stuff is going to mean. You just touched on a moment ago, just perhaps some of the struggles of the last head coach, last staff. As an athletic department, what was the process like trying to knowing that all these things are changing, all these the landscape is shifting in such profound ways. What was the kind of process like behind the scenes of trying to maybe get the prior staff and folks try to embrace the way the sport has changed?
It was coming so fast, and then it became unpredictable when you combine name, image, and likeness and what it really was, which was pay for play and tampering and inducement, with the transfer portal, which really meant free agency. Folks can come and go kind of at their leisure, if you will, at least for a one-time free pass. And those things were difficult for any of us to grapple with, and you really couldn't have anticipated how difficult and, very frankly, how bad it was becoming. And so it became very clear that as you look forward, you got to have a head coach and staff around him, very frankly, who relate better to this younger generation and this different generation of student athletes that's coming in that you have to recruit, who have grown up on social media, who have grown up with third-party influencers, AAU coaches, 7-on-7 football coaches, and now in a world where you're talking about name, image, and likeness, monetizing your ability even before you've played it down. And then you can essentially have all the leverage because you can determine when you go somewhere, and now you can determine how quickly you depart somewhere. So you very frankly needed younger leadership, particularly in football, who could relate and are closer to that world of social media and instant gratification and constant communication, and used to dealing with AAU coaches and 7-on-7 coaches and third-party influences because they're much closer to their experience in high school and college. That's what Kenny represented. The prior staff had very frankly none of that capacity in a quickly changing era with a new generation of student athletes that you had to deal with. And Kenny was an ideal selection to fit that need. And I suspect that you're going to, as you see new head coaches come on in football and in basketball and in some of the other sports, they're going to tend younger and more relatable to the new generation of student athletes coming into college.
How tough was it personally for you? Just obviously you get the friendship and the relationship that you've had with Herm for so many years, but also from the business aspect, as you mentioned, realizing that you need somebody in here to lead Sun Devil football that is, perhaps more equipped for the modern game and where the sport is going.
It's always tough to make decisions to separate from anyone under any circumstances, and certainly when you've known someone for 25 plus years and you're friends, that puts an extra layer of angst to it. But at the end of the day, I've got a responsibility to Sun Devil athletics and to these programs and to our community and our institution to make the right decisions, however hard they might be. So when it came time, we're big boys. We know when it's time. I know when it was time. Herman knew it was time. And so while it was hard, it wasn't a difficult decision to make because, very frankly, you put it all together and you knew it was the right decision to make, I think, at the right time, i.e., let's get this thing behind us so we could start looking forward, including determining who would be our next head coach here. And we started that due diligence way earlier than most of you media folks, Brad, had prognosticated. And so we knew we had an opportunity to have some really fine candidates vying for this position. And Kenny was one of them, and he emerged and obviously prevailed.
You mentioned a moment at the top, just kind of, folks are stopping you out there, at the grocery store and such, that just really kind of, expressing their enthusiasm. One of the things that kind of jumped out to me is that a lot of former players who really did not feel like welcome under the previous regime, but are now feeling really embraced and having that energy. What is it like just to see kind of the reaction of the fan base, the community, former players, just everybody kind of almost so far so good, just like really enthused about the direction of the Sun Devil football, that it's opening up to to fans, being more accessible to former players. Just kind of everybody is kind of now really energized by this new direction of the program.
Yeah, well, that's certainly part of what the early positives are, that people are responding the way we had hoped they would and anticipated to some degree, but they probably exceeded those expectations in terms of how they have embraced Kenny and the energy that we have around the football program now. So it's been very gratifying. And people ask me, how are you feeling? I said, I'm feeling wonderful. We got a great new coach, great new staff, a lot of energy and buzz, and we're undefeated. And so I'm really pleased right now, and I think the fan base, from what I understand, is also very pleased. But we anticipate really positive movement and probably better and hopefully more long-term sustainable success here, hoping to get there quicker than maybe some people anticipate we might.
Perfect lead to my next question. Obviously, a lot goes into changing the fortunes of a program that went just 3-9 a year ago. We've seen the roster turnover be pretty extensive. I believe it's second in the nation only to Colorado, and what they're doing up there. Kind of given that process, a new staff and turning over the roster, what are your expectations in terms of kind of a timeline of when you'd like to see this program kind of being able to step up and contend for the conference crown at a realistic level?
Well, everybody would like you to say, hey, we're here to win now. We're here to win now. And very frankly, we want to win now. But when you have the kind of roster turnover and leadership turnover that you have to understand that you've got to be patient, because there's a whole lot of other programs out there that are really fine programs, and they're not startups, and they have experience, proven players and coaches, and so they probably have an advantage. So I don't put a time frame on it per se, Brad, in terms of wins and losses, but what you want to see immediately is a culture and a sense of togetherness and purpose, and I guess you would call it, for me, just an environment of engagement by everyone who touches that program. No folks isolated out here, no folks feeling like they aren't a part of it. And I think Kenny's leadership and the way he's putting his staff together, because he brought in a really strong staff and kept some really strong folks, Sean and Joe Connolly, to name two of them. That was the absolute right thing to do. But the folks he has brought in also have an enthusiasm and I think a commitment to this area, because a lot of them for Arizona, as we well know, to come in and work with him as a team of leaders. And I think that gives us a really good chance to maybe accelerate our performance, including our wins and losses. Again, I don't put any time frame on them. As long as we are competitive, we're culturally sound, and we see that we are getting better, that's what I'm looking for.
One of the taglines here, activate the Valley, and obviously generating the excitement and the buzz around the program, but also just kind of getting the business folks around there and the dollars flowing in, and obviously NIL is such a wild landscape still. How have you seen kind of just the local business leaders and community kind of react to this hire, the push to activate the Valley, and what steps is the athletic department taking to kind of further and the activation phase, if you will, of getting that ball rolling at a better pace?
Well, we're certainly, when you talk about activate the Valley and you're talking about the various things that Kenny and the rest of the staff and we're doing to essentially follow up on that, take advantage of opportunities to be out there promoting, cajoling, ticket season sales, having folks excited about what the way forward is. We can do that. Kenny is doing a really nice job getting out there with business community members, talking with them about the need for their support and, very frankly, their investment, to talk to our collective, which we have, about what your needs and what your desires are as a business to help our student athletes in football and our other programs to be able to be competitive in the NIL space. We can't specifically arrange deals or be agent for deals or do the real nitty-gritty substance of making these deals appear for our student athletes, but we can certainly educate the public and talk to business leaders about what the needs are and what our student athletes have expressed in terms of what they'd like to do, and then very free to then introduce them to the collective folks, and then they take it from there. So being a facilitator of the introductions for the folks who are supposed to be doing that, we can do that, and Kenny's been very effective in getting with business community leaders and encouraging them to talk to our collective folks.
Recently, there was an announcement was made that Rachel Bacchus was appointed as ASU Athletics' first full-time on-campus general manager of NIL. So what would that role entail, and what kind of process do you think that's going to undertake, and or improvements we might see on the NIL front for ASU Athletics? Yeah,
well, she works directly for Altius, which is one of the leading NIL consultants in the business. And Altius is working with a number of universities. But what they have done is to hire a general manager specifically for various campuses. In this case, Rachel is our specific general manager for NIL. She works for Altius, a third-party consultant to us, but she also works directly in this office, and her job is to be available to our student athletes to talk with them about the nitty-gritty of the NIL world, the pros and cons, what the contracts should look like, what they shouldn't, what are some of the market drivers, what are some of the other benchmark best cases that we can show you that others have done in similarly situated situations. So by having them in-house, she is able to directly educate and talk with our coaches about what they can and cannot do, but more importantly, be an everyday resource for student athletes who have an interest, have questions, want to make sure we're doing it consistent with compliance, so that's what she brings to the table. An inside general manager specifically to help our student athletes manage and then take advantage of NIL opportunities.
I recently spoke with Jalen Conyers and asked him, as a high-profile college athlete, what things he looks for NIL, and he said, there's obviously players around the country, there's big deals, whatever. But he's like, I know that the big money is coming in my future in terms of the next level. But like right now, I just want to be able to go to the movies or go to dinner with the guys and not have to worry about anything. Just enough to kind of just be comfortable in a day-to-day sense. What's your understanding? What have you heard from Sun Devil athletes or even coaches about what their hopes are and what they would like to get out of this new frontier of NIL?
Well, when the NIL world first started, you sit down and we had a leadership group in football that would sit down and talk about some of the things that they've heard and some of the things that they would like to see potentially NIL provide, like meal cards, grocery store debit cards, if you will, that were handed out in exchange for, making an appearance or signing some autographs or going to an employee outing for Kroger or what have you. Certainly to the extent that they're able to essentially make cash by doing appearances. Not a lot, but enough to essentially do some of the things we're talking about. Those are the types of things early on that were being discussed. But as time has gone on and the world of NIL has gotten crazier, then the best practice has been to make sure they're being educated directly by NIL third-party consultants and our new general manager like Rachel, who can vet and ferret and flush those things out. Our job as an athletic department is to constantly provide educational opportunity updates on what is going on in the NIL landscape, primarily through Rachel, and we have Tony DeFeo and some other administrators who are conversing and converse in the NIL to be able to also continue the education process. It's driven by education. All they really want more than anything is knowledge, current information that can help them determine their way forward in this NIL thing.
We're a few years into the NIL world, and some schools are further along than others. The collective recently launched with the Sun Angel Collective. At this point, how do you feel Sun Devil Athletics kind of stacks up against maybe some other conference schools, some other Power 5 level programs at this point?
Well, one of the biggest problems in NIL is nobody is reporting anything. They're not being very transparent with regard to what the deals are, who's getting how much, what the terms are, what the duration of the deals are. And so one of the problems you have is that there really is no vault of real, reliable information to know what everybody's really doing. And no one's talking. And that's part of the problem, and that leads some people, including Charlie Baker, our new president of the NCAA, to say you've got to have some national standards. That would mean certifying the agents and then having a database where the true meanings of these deals and the true terms have to be reported, so that folks get a real understanding of what the market really is. And so it's not just speculation. And like some people say, when people talk about NIL, most of the time they're just lying about the realities. And so that's part of the problem. And so you really don't know, per se, Brad, what others are doing. What I can say about us is, and we said it earlier, and some folks misinterpreted early comments from Dr. Crow and myself as saying we want nothing to do with NIL. No, what Dr. Crow said is, I don't like the idea of NIL. I think it's contrary to what folks came here for. But he didn't say we wouldn't do it. And what I said is, we're not going to get in an arms race with regard to NIL because we don't have that desire. And very frankly, we don't have the capacity here financially to get in an arms race in NIL with Texas A&M or Oregon or LSU or Alabama. We just don't have it here, no matter what we'd like to think. So, but we need to arrange and get ourselves to be competitive because it's not going away. And so we believe that through our collective, we're going to be very competitive. But you're not going to come here if NIL is your driving force as a student athlete, or your parents, or your third-party influencer, or your agent. If the NIL dollar amount is what is motivating you, then this won't be your place. But if all the other things that you're looking for in a student-athlete college experience are here, then we will have opportunities to at least be competitive.
What you touched on a moment ago, just that the desire perhaps for more transparency, more data out there in terms of what other schools on a national level are doing. Other states are introducing legislation now, which might appear to be like kind of inducements for kids to stay home, that they can start cashing in high school if they sign with a local. Just so many differences all across the country. What guardrails from an NCAA, perhaps even a congressional level, do you think needed on this NIL front to get, we keep using the phrase the last couple of years, like it's still the Wild West, and it still very much is, but like at what point or what can be done to kind of maybe rein it in and get everybody on at least a similar playing level?
Yeah, then that's the most difficult question that everyone's grappling with. Some folks will throw up their hands right now and say the horses are so far out of the crowd, you'll never get them back in. I happen to believe that. How do you, at some point, though, figure a way to build fences around multiple acreage so at least the horses got to stay within a certain parameters? And that's what national legislation, hopefully, if we can get there, would be intended to do. At least have some standardization, have some requirement that the agents who are doing these deals be certified, because then at least you can hopefully have some sense that the quality and the honesty and the integrity in these deals are actually there. And then you want, so certify these agents. And then you want a national database where the contracts have to, by federal legislation, be recorded so that not where your name comes up, but at least be recorded to say, in this market, at this position, with this type of product, this is what was an NIL deal. And then be able to have a database where you can go and then get some market information. Determine if, in fact, it's a fair deal, it's an up deal, it's a down deal, what the other terms are. So certification and then some standardization and then some reporting requirement will give you some quality control over the data, the information, so that hopefully you're just making better decisions and the student athletes and their parents doing these deals are making better decisions. But beyond that, I don't know how you control it. Some people think of NIL, name, image, and likeness really means now it's legal.
Yeah.
And if you can imagine how different people interpret that differently. There are some folks who very, very frankly have said, we're going to do what we want in this NIL world. And the NCAA does not have the enforcement mechanism nor the desire to try to stop us because it's too wild right now. And so that's going to occur until there are some, in my view, federal standards or parameters put around it, or else in 3 or 4 years between NIL and the transfer portal, college sports, particularly men's basketball and football, are going to look very different than what we have now.
Speaking of NCAA enforcement, do you have any update in terms of when the school might hear about the NCAA investigation of football?
No, and you can anticipate that I'm going to tell you that because it is an ongoing investigation. I'm not permitted to talk about it, so we'll move to the next question.
One of the things that the NCAA has kind of stressed is that in terms of the investigations is trying to move away from penalizing perhaps in this situation like almost complete turnover within the football program, not trying to sanction a school heavily. If the house had been clean, so to speak. Do you think that might play a factor in ultimately the NCAA decision?
Again, I got to tell you, because it's an investigation, I can't permitted to talk to it because anything I say may be misconstrued, and so we won't say anything.
So obviously there's been a tremendous amount of successes on a number of sports over the recent years. But it seems like, in terms of like the big three, if you will, in terms of highest profile, football, men's basketball, baseball, that it's been about 6 or 7 academic years since any of them finished in a top 25. Obviously a school like ASU has a lot of resources, a Power 5 level program, and a lot of resources behind it. While there's some other schools, maybe like San Diego State, Utah, Oregon State, in terms of just the regionally, are able to get in the top 25 on a national level on a pretty consistent basis. How do you square kind of the lack of success in those 3 sports specifically nationally versus kind of what ASU has behind in terms of its resources and stature?
Yeah, well, you're never going to do well enough. Sometimes I have to remind myself and think about the last time in those 3 sports ASU was a world beater. consistently. It's been a long time. And so if you think back and look at the facts, I think you will have to agree that ASU has not been successful in any of those three sports on a sustainable long-term basis for a very long time. We're trying to change that. San Diego State, Utah, you use those as examples. We sponsor 26 varsity sports here. I think Utah sponsors 18. They have more money, apparently, and energy to invest in certain things. We are a more broad-based program. I don't know about San Diego State, but I give them kudos because they actually have done pretty well in a lesser conference, although they do well against the Pac-12. So when folks try to make those comparisons, Brad, sometimes I pause because I don't want to be perceived as making excuses, but Arizona State is trying to get out of being that proverbial sleeping giant. I had to remind folks, we hadn't been to the College World Series since 2010 in baseball. I don't know the last time we finished top 25 in basketball, but I know that Bobby is the only coach here who's gone to the postseason 3 times in his career, Doug, and no one had before.
Yeah.
I don't know what makes us think our football program has been a world beater. Last time we went to the Rose Bowl was when?
97.
97. And so I appreciate you asking the question because hopefully it gives me a chance to honestly say we're working on it. We don't compare ourselves to those others. We compare ourselves to what we are, where we've been and where we're trying to go. And so we're trying to do that. In hockey, by the way, you can add in there as a program that's now a featured program of ours, and we think has a chance to do better. But we're very confident that going forward we have a chance in football, men's basketball, hockey, baseball with Willie Bloomquist, notwithstanding the struggles we're having currently. And then our basketball program on the women's side will continue to strive. Our men's swimming and diving program is 2nd in the nation. Yeah. To be sure, wrestling was 6th in the nation or 7th in the nation. We do have soccer. We do have water polo. We do have other sports. So in our golf, our men were 2nd in the nation last year. Got a chance to do real well in finishing the tournament today and then in the championships here next week. So thank you for the question because hopefully it gives me an opportunity to say it's not just about those 3. And oh, by the way, those 3 haven't been world beaters ever here. When Cush was here, yes, we had some moments, to be sure. But that was in the old WAC, and that was a long time before 1978 when we joined the Pac-12.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if it was easy to just, have a high-profile program be in the top 25, everybody would do it.
Yeah. Believe me, that's a lofty goal, and that's a goal we aspire because we said very clearly we want to be, across our sports, top 3 in the conference and top 15 in the nation. And when we said that, some folks thought that was an audacious thing to say, but it remains our goal. And so, no, we haven't hit it yet in terms of the performance on the field, and we'll continue to work on that. But I hope you're going to ask us about our academics, because we have hit that, because for the 2nd year in a row in our academic progress rate, we are number 1 in the Pac-12 ahead of Stanford and everybody else. And when we attained that goal last year, it was the first time ever any school had surpassed Stanford. Arizona State did it last year. And as you may or may not be aware, just last week it was announced that Arizona State's APR was for the 2nd year in a row the highest academic rating in the Pac-12 in athletics. I hope you mentioned that.
Oh, yeah, that was a little bit later on, but we'll bring that up right now.
Yeah, bring it up right now. Yeah,
so obviously, yeah. So what do you attribute that surge? Because obviously, you mentioned Stanford's been on that perch for a long time. Then be able to knock them down a little bit. What do you feel has been the the impetus behind getting that Sun Devil surge in the classroom to get to the top of the conference?
Well, a focused commitment starting even before I got here. led by Gene Boyd and then some others in the Office of Student Athlete Development, to really put teeth and resources and, very frankly, culture commitment behind the student academic experience here at ASU. And so with a deliberate and very intentional emphasis on upping programs and upping tutors and upping mentors and upping the quality. Mike and Cindy Watts made a significant investment. I don't know if you've been down there, but our academic center on the third floor is as nice as any in the conference, probably any in the country. And so we've worked hard on providing access for our students to want to spend more time in study hall and down at our academic student athlete facility, and just an overall commitment and an emphasis by coaches that recruit student athletes, recruit students that want to come here and academically excel, tout the Barrett Honors College, tout all the advances that we've made here with Michael Crow on the academic side of this institution, and then coaches and administrators and counselors. You better have a personal commitment to the academic side of the experience here to be part of the way we want to run this athletic department for years to come. And so a combination of those things, and it took a while. It was in my 8th year that we finally tracked down my alma mater, Stanford, and surpassed them in terms of the academics. It was just a sustained, deliberate effort and an emphasis culturally on the academics have to be really, really important. And so that's what it did. It wasn't an overnight success. It took a lot of work by a lot of good people over time and just stayed persistent and, very frankly, dedicated to the mission.
A lot of, obviously a group effort and a lot of support from the university in that endeavor. Do you feel that you have that same level of support from the university and the school for the athletics to have that same level of success on the field as in the classroom? We talked kind of touching back to the kind of the big three sports, in terms of helping their profile. Do you feel that the support from the school, from Dr. Crow, is at that same level in order to reach those same heights?
Oh, yeah, you've got to also make your own way in a lot of things. So athletics is not an inexpensive endeavor. Neither is providing the academic environment we have here. We've got some help from the school, but we also fundraise and did some of our own philanthropy to get those things funded at the appropriate level. And so while, yes, we feel supported by the university, what we understand we still have to do more of is to fundraise amongst our fans and enthusiasts from our sports at a higher level, like they do at a higher level at a lot of other schools. And so that's also part of our challenge. But from the academic side of it, the campus side, we certainly have adequate support to help us be successful. And now as an athletic department, we've also got to do a better job touching and reaching our fans out there in terms of making investments in our various programs to help us do more and stay competitive financially, because you're not going to compete with Oregon and Phil Knight. You're not going to compete with all the money that they have at SC. You're not going to compete with all the endowment money they have at Stanford. And so you understand where you're at. And so what you have to do is to, within your own market, your own environment, try to find additional ways to support and advance yourself financially. And I think we're doing a very solid job here trying to advance that, and we'll continue to do so. We've got to fundraise more, to provide more resources to ourselves in Sun Devil Athletics.
Kenny Dillingham shared a lot about his memories of, coming here as a kid and the game day experience, the tailgating scene, and he's mentioned the story about him almost getting hit by a car out there. Just I've heard from a lot of fans over the years, the tailgating. They have some concerns about just the future of tailgating. The areas are kind of shrinking a little bit. Some more corporate partners are being brought in. What's your vision of what game day, for football specifically, looks like in terms of the tailgating scene versus also having that your corporate partners, be a part of that. Obviously, space is at a premium.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things going on here as well. Just all those things coming together. How do you kind of square, perhaps Kenny's vision, the fans' vision, versus kind of on things on the corporate side?
Yeah. Well, it's a balancing act, because we were just talking about what is important. If you want to financially support your programs at the level you need, particularly in this day and age, you got to create revenue. And so it's a balancing act, because you certainly want to accommodate and have as much quality tailgating and game day experience as you can. But the other push on that is, if there's a way to monetize some of that area and then convert some of that area to funds that actually come back to help your student athlete experience and help you be able to invest in football or the other sports at the level that those other schools are doing, that we're not going to get that support from campus, then you got to have some balancing. And it's very difficult, because the number one thing you want to do is have a fan experience. A fun game day experience is part of what this is all about. But you have to have a balancing act on what you can do and what you can continue to provide that is not a revenue producer. It's hard.
Yeah. The last couple times that we've done these interviews have been remote, with the pandemic. So I remember the last time I was in here sitting at this table, you had a model over on the other side of the room of a proposed new hockey arena. Mm-hmm. And obviously, Mullet has opened. I've been there. It's a great building, great atmosphere. And it's had a great impact already. Desert Financial Arena. There's Dr. Crow made some comments about its current status. What would you like to see, in terms of perhaps a possible renovations there, or a new home for basketball, or what kind of timeline and in terms of an infrastructure project and on the basketball Desert Financial Arena front might there be?
Yeah, it's risky to put a deadline or a timeline preference out there publicly, because then it gets a little mushy sometimes. But I've been on record, and I'll say again, I think Desert Financial needs some work to make it a recruiting plus for us in all of our sports that compete in there, because it is not now. We all know that. I don't think it is a very good fan-friendly environment to go to just to have fun, in addition to seeing your sports play, because we could use some serious improvements on the concourses, some aesthetic upgrades. And then there's no question that our locker rooms and some of the stuff downstairs, including the media room where you probably spent some time, could use some tender love and care. And so we are not going to abandon our desire, at least not from Sun Devil Athletics and goals, to figure ways to improve Desert Financial Arena for the fan experience, and equally important for our student athlete experience. And very importantly, facilities matter. They matter a lot. And so when you're trying to recruit, and particularly in this day and age, NIL and transfer portal, when you're talking about being competitive, you at least have to be competitive when you show them where they're going to be spending their time and where they're going to be playing. And so we need to reduce the disadvantage that we currently have with that as our home arena, and we are bound and determined to do so, but I can't give you any specifics per se.
Shifting gears a little bit, I mean, we've covered a number of hot topics already. I don't know if any's hotter right now than the Pac-12 media deal, the Pac-12's long-term future. What's your sense on just kind of where things are at in terms of a media deal, and how confident are you personally in kind of the long-term viability of the Pac-12, Pac-10, whatever shape it ultimately takes?
Yeah, I'm very confident in the long-term viability. The 10 schools are solid. UCLA and USC will be moving on. But I do believe the 10 schools remaining are very solid, and there's a commitment to do that. It will be, I think, summertime when we have a deal to announce. I don't know if that's July or August, but the latest thinking is that by summer We should have an MMR deal, a multimedia rights deal with the Pac-12 to announce. After that, you then have to make sure that you have your grant of rights, which essentially is the 10 remaining schools signing on to the deal, essentially granting their media rights to the conference so no one is inclined to leave before the deal expires. And then once you have that, then very frankly, I think the notion of potentially looking at expansion makes sense. You've heard, everybody in this room has heard that San Diego State and SMU are two of the institutions most commonly mentioned when you're talking about potentially expanding the Pac-12. And there are a couple other schools that sometime you hear mentioned, pick your choice. But I think the thought of expansion is real. I think the timing will be after you have the multimedia rights deal done, you have your grant of rights solidified, and then I think you might have some fairly quick movement on that. That's just my opinion.
Is expansion necessary, or is it just good to get back to 12, or do you think that some of these schools that might be prospective members bring enough that more pieces of the pie would still be beneficial to Arizona State and other schools?
Yeah, well, you ask a good question because a lot of folks are asking that. Is expansion really necessary? It used to be the Pac-10. Before that was Pac-8. And at the Pac-10, there was a lot of success back then. So is it necessary? That's a question that folks, particularly the presidents and chancellors, at the end of the day are going to be grappling with. That being said, I think there's also some sense that you want to make sure your markets and your TV content is expansive enough, and so you get the two additional teams, one additional team, two additional teams, gives you that extra oomph with regard to your coverage, and then very frankly the value of your TV and media rights goes with potentially with a couple other really nice markets if you can get them.
Have there been any discussions, internally that, if things with the Pac-12's long-term viability don't necessarily shake out in a positive way, that, looking at whether other prospective conference homes for Arizona State athletics?
We don't have that discussion internally because we are a solid, important member of the Pac-12, Pac-10, Pac-12. And very frankly, I've had no discussions about other conferences. The only discussions we might have is what other conferences are trying to have some of their members come to our conference. Obviously, we talked about San Diego State, SMU, and some others, so that is clear in those comments. But no, we've had no internal discussions about ASU going anywhere else because that's, very frankly, no desire.
So last time we talked was before the news of the LA school's departure, and that just seemed to be kind of latest in a, the seismic shift in just college athletics. And, I think we touched a little bit last year on just kind of, perhaps the Power 2 Group of 8 type of shift that, some folks are talking about. What does the Pac-12 or Pac-10, whatever it's going to be, what does this conference need to do most to strengthen its position? Obviously, securing as good a media deal as possible. What else needs to happen to help close that gap and kind of mitigate the damage and with the SEC and the Big Ten currently on the top of the hill?
We need to continue to have very competitive football. Fact is, most of the programs are financed at the end of the day by how how well their football team's doing, and that means you got to be successful on the field. You have to be successful in the entire product that you're presenting and selling to your fans. That's just the way it goes. So we know last year's football season, I think we had 6 teams at the end of the day ranked in the top 25. We got a lot of exposed. We got to do more of that more consistently, and the same, very frankly, in men's and women's basketball. Women's basketball have been pretty strong. We have to do a much better job competing. You win on the national stage, you win in the tournaments, you win in the big bowl games, you get in the CFP. That's what you got to do, man. That's what you got to do if you want to. If you want to provide value and value to your TV partners, you gotta win big, and that's what we need to do. That's what we will not reduce significantly enough the financial gap between the SEC and the Big Ten on their TV deals. But if we're able to get a solid enough media rights deal, and then we are in those big games, in those major tournaments against high competition, then we'll start getting more and more folks staying up on the East Coast to actually watch us. And then that generates more interest in us. And then hopefully the next time around, you're in a better position to negotiate a better TV deal.
Yeah, you mentioned the importance of, it kind of starts with football. Just if you're competitive nationally as a conference in football, that really kind of the rising tide lifts all ships, so to speak. What can the conference do to elevate the football product, collectively, and put more emphasis on putting out a more visible and competitive national product, especially in an era of playoff expansion?
The playoff expansion is going to be a great opportunity for our conference. And so you've got to invest in your football. You have to be able to attract and retain good coaches. You have to be able to have facilities that will overcome, particularly in this day and age, as we've been talking about, the NIL component and the transfer portal presence by having really good facilities, really good programs, really good coaches, and an excitement on game day, and that gets people wanting to come here, student athletes and fans, because then if they come in greater numbers, obviously your revenues are increased, your value proposition for TV and other purposes, sponsorships, naming rights are increased. That's what we need to do in the Pac-12, and certainly what we need to do here.
We've seen in football, the high amount of turnover, the number of transfers brought in. We'll talk about Bobby Hurley and his team here in a moment, but just, it seems like he's having to put together most of his team on an annual basis. Just the overall nature of the transfer portal, as it currently stands, is this sustainable right now? Is there tweaks and like things that can be done, just kind of this wild west nature of the portal to kind of solidify things so that a lot of teams aren't just basically having to be rebuilt on a year in, year out basis?
I think the hardest job in college sports right now is a men's basketball coach at Division I level. We have 2 guys returning from last year's team. We are not the Lone Ranger in that regard. You can't predict your roster next year, let alone 2 or 3 years from now, the way you could before the NIL, before the transfer portal. When you essentially came and you were committed here unless you wanted to leave and go sit out a year somewhere else. That landscape is gone, and so the freedom of movement and in a lot of cases the money that goes with it has made the job of the basketball coach, men and women in college now, tough job. But it is what it is. It is here to stay. And so you need someone like Bobby. And one of the reasons why it was so important for us to keep and extend Bobby is last year Bobby did a really fine job with the transfer portal. We had a good group of players who really didn't know each other and was able to meld them pretty good. Not the final result we wanted, but we did go to the postseason and did get to a second game and had our 23 wins. Under the circumstances, that was a very strong result. So we think Bobby is, I don't know how you say this, made to manage and recruit with a portal scenario because he's very persuasive. He's played the game. I think players respond to him. And so while we have lost players through the portal, we have strong confidence that Bobby is bringing equally strong and very arguably better players back through the portal to play with us. And we'll see this year, but we're feeling real good about his ability to handle the portal. But it's tough across all the sports.
Yeah.
In women's basketball, very frankly, there are some conversations that start with, Coach, I'm interested. I'd like to talk to you, but I've got a $50,000 minimum NIL request that starts the conversation. If you can nod your head to that, then we can keep talking.
As we wind down here, let's maybe kind of do a little bit of a lightning round in terms of hitting on some of these other sports. Stay on the hardwood there. Bobby Hurley, obviously 23 wins, as you mentioned. You get to a tournament win. What do you think needs to happen, especially given the kind of annual rebuilds and just kind of the nature of the portal, needs to happen for ASU to kind of become a team that can consistently get into that win multiple games in terms, get to that second weekend? Yeah,
we need to figure out ultimately the portal strategy and find something that we think works for us and this is sustainable. This will be the second year of really seeing how that works out. But until there is national legislation and some restrictions or governors or standards for the portal, this is the way it's going to be, particularly in men's basketball. The tampering and the stuff that's going on now with men's basketball players, in particular with NIL and the portal, rosters are going to churn like this for the foreseeable future. And so you've got to have a coach who's got the moxie to almost rebuild every year. But if you have a formula and you have a profile of the types of players you need to bring into your program, bring in to your system to do what you want to do, even if just for a year, you got to be able to figure that out. And I have some confidence, actually strong confidence, that Bobby has got it and will be able to do that. But the question is a good one because I don't think anybody can tell you emphatically what it's going to take other than year in and year out a consistent ability to rebuild a roster and almost go from scratch.
Staying in basketball, on the women's side, replacing a legend's always hard. Natasha Adair takes over last year. Unfortunately, 1-17 mark in Pac-12 play. What did you see from year one, and also some improvements you'd like to see and some things that can be done to improve things in year two?
Yeah. Well, when you take over a program that, very frankly, is a rebuild, which this one was, because a lot of folks that Charlie had here were on the way out, and someone had already transferred even before Natasha could get into her office. And so you just have to be patient. Charlie had a lot of great years here, had some solid success. But in Charlie's first 4 years, when she took over a rebuilding program, there wasn't a single winning season at all. She didn't win until her fifth year and then started to get some momentum. So it's hard to come in and rebuild, and it's particularly hard to come in and rebuild when you have the transfer portal and NIL, even for women's basketball working. And so Natasha took on a much greater challenge coming in than Charlie did even those years ago. And so the first year saw culture setting, expectations, figuring out who fit and who didn't. And now Natasha will just be in her second year, recruiting her own student athletes, fitting the culture and the profile that she's looking for. And so, and then the student athletes in basketball who are staying, including Ty Skinner, we have to have belief that it's going to be a stronger, better team going forward. But you have to, give time on these rebuilds, just like we gave Charlie way back. She didn't come in and just the world was on fire. It took 5 years before she got to a winning record. It's a hard job, man. It's a hard job. So we're going to be patient, believing that Natasha is off to a good start, and we think she will recruit well. She will recruit the student athletes that fit her different style, and we'll get better.
And speaking of kind of like a rebuild, baseball, in year two under Willie, some real strong middle part of the season. Last couple weeks, struggling a little bit, but still overall a lot of young guys, a lot of youth on that team. What's your take on the progress of Sun Devil baseball under Willie Bloomquist?
I think Willie's doing a fine job because it starts with culture. Willie had to take over a culture that was not good in our baseball. We'll all acknowledge that. I'll acknowledge it and own it that our former coach did not do a good job. Willie, like with Kenny, it was a deliberate, intentional thing to bring back an ASU guy who understood, who'd played here, who knows this place, who's passionate about this place. And he did play, 13, 14 years in the bigs. Yeah. So that kind of gives him some credibility when you're recruiting and also when you're coaching. That being said, it's a young team. And so you mentioned we're struggling. Yeah, we got, 4 or 5 freshmen consistently in the lineup. And when you get to this point in the year where the lights are brighter and the pressure is up, I think you're seeing some of the youth show its inexperience there. But overall, has Willie advanced his program quickly in terms of the culture and the talent, the expectations? Yes, because those freshmen are going to be sophomores, and I don't think we're going to be losing a whole bunch of folks out of transfers. We may lose some guys to go play Major League Ball. But I think his recruiting, and I just think how he's managing the team along with his assistant coaches is very positive. Yes, disappointed that the younger team has struggled in the last 3 series, but they're much improved in my view. And I look at the long term. The wins and losses are important. The wins will be more prevalent here going forward just because of the way he's operating.
Bob Bowman took the men's swim and dive team to number 1 ranking during the course of this season. Leon Marchand, just record after record. Yeah. What have you seen from the surge of that program? What he's been able to do with that, and kind of also the international impact. And I talked to him, and swimmers are all around the world seeing what Marchand and others are doing here, and wanting to make Tempe a destination. Yeah,
Bob Bowman's done a great job, and again, he's in our 7th or 8th year. It's hard building these programs up, particularly when you take over a rebuild. But Bob, very strategic, very deliberate in how he wanted to build a roster on the men's and women's side, by the way, because Rachel is doing a heck of a job as our associate head coach of the women's side. But the international focus was really good. And remember, Bob was also the one wise enough when it appeared that the second year or third year COVID was going to pretty much wipe out our season, where he said, it would behoove us to just redshirt everyone. And let's make the investment to do that, because then they will be able to come back with a COVID-free year of training and then really get after it. And oh, by the way, on the academic side of it, we'll have a number of those students getting their masters here while they're getting that extra year. So the combination of those things, we made the investment to do that at Bob's recommendation and request. It just made so much sense. And so we were able to build up a roster, and these kids were so dedicated because they knew we had committed to them through a redshirt year that we didn't have to do. And everybody else got a chance to come back and do a whole another year of academics to their benefit, and it worked out. So, but it took time. But number 1 in the Pac-12, first time we Pac-12 champion, beating Stanford, Cal, all those California schools. Michael Crow loves that. Yeah. And then went to the NCAA and made some noise before we finally fell to second place. But a program is now, we think, set up for long-term success because of the way he's recruited with that international focus for specific, really difference makers. And Leon Marchand was certainly one of those. But then you think of our guys like Grant House, who was here for 6 years, took the red shirt, took the COVID year, ended up being a stalwart here, and someone who is always going to be credited with helping to turn this program around. And now we can recruit with anybody through the success, and with Bob Bowman here and Leon and others. So really proud of what's happening in swimming.
Just about done here, but What's a program that we in the media or you, the fans, just aren't talking enough about?
I think you need to really applaud what Zeke Zones has done with our wrestling. We were fourth. I think we were sixth or seventh this year. But that's hard in wrestling. He's done a marvelous job in wrestling. And then certainly you got to always look at our men's and women's golf programs. The women suffered a little bit last weekend, but consistently very strong. And folks, particularly those around here like golf, should get out and enjoy what these student athletes are doing out there. So, and then our soccer program has improved. We made the NCAAs again. We had a first round loss, but the fact is in a very tough conference. Our soccer program is faring much better, so we need to pay some attention to our soccer program next fall.
Yeah, I did a podcast with Nicole Douglas, now the all-time leading scorer, great interview, and great to see what Coach Winkworth's doing there. Last question for you, two-parter. 9 years at the helm of Sun Devil Athletics. When you look back at your tenure, what accomplishment are you most proud of to look back and say that, this is something that we were able to get done? On the flip side, what's something you'd like to perhaps, get a redo on, and also a lesson from that situation that you took and applied moving forward?
The APR, the academic success that we've had, and it took a while to get here. But that's very gratifying because student comes first in the student athlete, and that's by design. I happen to really believe in strong quality education. I think I've been a beneficiary of that. So here I wanted to make sure that we had an environment and an expectation and a culture that it's academic first, folks, first and most. So I'm very proud of that. In terms of a do-over, would have loved to have been able to finish on the right path with football. When I came in here, it's like we got to fix football because football, very frankly, hadn't been fixed around here in a long time. So I regret that we fell short of that for a variety of reasons, but we did. And so I've got to do everything I can to let that go. And make sure that we fix football with Kenny and what we're trying to establish here going forward. So the biggest regret is we haven't fixed football yet. I came in, we had a couple good seasons with a coach I didn't hire, and then that didn't go in the right direction. And then we seem to be on the road to some success with a new model with a coach I did hire, and that went off the proverbial rails. And we're dealing with that. But now we have a chance with Kenny and this new set of coaches, and I think the kind of student athletes that they're enticing in here with just good programs and good thought and good vibes and good planning and good expectations and culture going forward. I'm optimistic. But those two things, the APR, and we haven't fixed football yet the way we needed to.
I'd like to thank Ray for taking the time to sit down with me for this episode. I'd also like to thank Doug Tamaro and Kim Nelson of ASU. Make sure you are subscribed to Speak of the Devils on the podcast platform of your choice for more episodes featuring guests such as Brian Ward, Brian Carrington, Chris Edmonds, DJ Foster, Rashad Samples, Jalen Conyers, Trenton Bourget, and many more. And also be sure to follow me on Twitter and Instagram at bdenny29.